Oh, what a Thanksgiving night. It was for Jim Crockett Promotions in 1983. The NC fans, they witnessed history in the Greensboro Coliseum. Oh, what a night. I'm John Renton with a retro review of NWA Starrcade 1983. During the winter storm, it was white hot inside the Greensboro Coliseum with 15,000 plus people getting to witness the landmark event of the century. Well, at least of the decade to that point. And it really would just uptick and uptick and uptick until around, late 87, early 88 when Jim Crockett Promotions would fall in a hole. That's been covered on various podcasts and documentaries. But at this point, they were just building up and building up. And Vince McMahon would like to do revisionist history and say, oh yeah, WrestleMania was the granddaddy of them all, but that sounds too old. We're just going to call it the biggest event of all time. It's such good shit, pal. He'd like to say that that was the first big card in wrestling history. He'd like to say that, but he'd be wrong. Starrcade happened well over a year before the first WrestleMania. Even the second Starrcade happened a few months before the first WrestleMania. So ha ha ha, Jim Crockett Promotions did it first. No wonder Vince McMahon held such disdain and, held Jim Crockett in such, not a very good regard, shall we say. He loved taking it to Jim Crockett Promotions and basically Jim Crockett Jr. because of the Black Saturday stuff and all this. It's been, I've talked about that on other reviews and everything, but it's kind of funny seeing Starrcade 1983, some 38 years after it happened, where some matches still hold up. The big matches, there's some really good shit, like new NWA Tag Team Champions, a brutal dog collar match, and a steel cage NWA Championship match that former NWA champion Gene Kiniski, as a special guest referee, tried to ruin for no goddamn reason. But man, Gene Kiniski was a hell of an NWA champion. I will never understand till the day I pass why he was the type of referee he was. There's being traditional, and then there's making it all about you. But that being said, also some of this card really has not aged well, in the sense that it basically has aged about as well as milk left on the dark side of Saturn. But there were about 15,500 people in the Greensboro Coliseum, $500,000 gate, with a closed circuit audience of 30,000 people. And again, in a snowstorm, a winter storm. It's hard to goddamn believe that many people came out. But the North Carolina fans, South Carolina, the Crockett fans, they were loyal and dedicated, and this was a big goddamn deal. Built around a Flair for the gold. Ric Flair going after Harley Race after Harley Race had beat him for the NWA Championship about 6 months prior, and he had put a bounty out on Ric Flair, and then you had Bob Orton Jr. and domestic violence aficionado Dick Slater himself trying to take out Ric Flair to collect the bounty. But Ric Flair would not be denied and would win, despite Gene Kiniski trying to be a traditional referee and basically, again, almost ruin the goddamn match. So, just slam us right into the action, why don't you? This was about a 3-hour show, and I think about 800% of it was goddamn interviews. So there are some things that have not aged all that well, but they did build it and build it and build it with Ric Flair, taking on Harley Race, and they did dueling stuff and talking to other people and everything, people that were on the card, people that were in the goddamn crowd. Dusty Rhodes had basically just come in recently and he wasn't even the booker. Apparently, rumor has it that Dory Funk Jr. was booking before. Rumor has it. Okay, I'm going to be done trying to do the Adele singing. But yeah, then Dusty would take over soon after that. He came up with the concept for Starrcade and sold to Jim Crockett, but that's always been the rumor. And again, if I'm wrong about the rumor, I apologize. Gordon Sully and Bob Cottle on commentary. Gordon Sully is one of the best of all time. I've also realized that sometimes, his commentary works, and then other times it's kind of just there, but he is a very traditional commentator and he's not background noise per se. He has a more laid-back approach. Bob Cottle, a little more enthusiastic. We have the Assassins, Jody Hamilton, and the man who would become Hercules Hernandez, taking on Bugsy McGraw and Rufus R. Jones. Paul Jones was in the corner of the Assassins. And looking back on this, now granted, 38 years ago, some people are going to have passed away. 4 of the 5 people here are no longer with us. I mean, Bugsy McGraw, of all people, is the one that's still alive. And that's nothing against, but you're just like looking, you're like, wow, okay, it's really jarring. It's like seeing the older WrestleManias, seeing some of the world-class events. So the crowd popped for Bugsy and Rufus, who were doing a lot of shucking and jiving, and the match wasn't great, but Bugsy certainly, got some big reactions. And even though it looked like they might get the victory, nope, the most devastating maneuver in all professional wrestling. Surprise roll-up, 1, 2, 3. Bugsy got pinned. Even in the 80s, surprise roll-ups all around. We cut to Cottle and Sully, who were talking about the card, and then Shivani, who was in the locker room with Ric Flair, Roddy Piper, Steamboat, and Charlie Brown, who was the Boogie Woogie Man, Jimmy Valiant, in a mask. If you couldn't tell that was Jimmy Valiant, then you either don't know who the hell Jimmy Valiant is, or if you knew who he was, you evidently have been, the recent victim of a major head injury, because it's obvious that it was him, the whole mask gimmick and stuff like that. But man, Jimmy Valiant, more on him in a bit. Kevin Sullivan and Mark Lewin with Gary Hart, who was all over this goddamn show, against Scott McGee and Johnny Weaver. I had no idea Johnny Weaver was still wrestling in 83, since he would do backstage interviews and stuff, for a couple Starrcades afterwards. This wasn't great. I mean, it was a lot. There was just a lot of Gary Hart interferes, and then we get, I believe Mark Lewin hits a knee drop off the top and covers Weaver 1, 2, 3. And then they decide, and then Scott attacks. He's like, I'm gonna save my granddad. Nah, it's unfair. Johnny Weaver wasn't that old. He was probably just close to being his granddad. Unfair. He attacks Gary Hart, who had a spike in his boot. There's a spike in my boot. And Mark Lewin says, okay, boom, boom, boom. I'm just gonna stab him. That didn't look like stabbing. I apologize. And McGee's just like bleeding like crazy. More on that later. Angelo Mosca comes in. He gets stabbed in the arm. Ow, my arm. I'm not supposed to get spike in it. And that factors into a match a little bit later. But yeah, that was pretty much just getting the crowd booed to boo, and Kevin Sullivan was being his usual self. Mark Lewin still in pretty good shape at this point, despite the fact I think he'd been wrestling since the late 50s. So anyway, Gordon Sully and Bob Cottle talk a lot more, and then we have Barbara Clary, who's with the family. Was the trip worth it? Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. And then sorry to any North Carolina fans. And then Shivani's interviewing Harley Reyes about the main event. And then we get renowned murder cover-up artist Carlos Colon. Fuck Carlos Colon. Fuck Jose Gonzalez. Fuck anybody that had anything to do with covering up the murder of Bruiser Brody. Against the equally, big piece of shit, literally, Abdullah the Butcher, a guy that says, oh, I didn't know about this. I think he knew. I think he did, because he was in the Puerto Rican office. And he also was trying to act all emotional on the dark side of the ring about, he fucking knew. And guess what, Abdullah? Nobody feels bad about the injuries that you suffered. You did it to yourself, you goddamn couch. Anyway, dear God, why? Why did this happen? Why were these guys allowed on any major pay-per-view broadcast at this point? I mean, I get it, Abdullah was an attraction, but what did he offer outside of blood and guts? Nothing, because he couldn't fucking wrestle. He was an attraction. Blood flying, the referee got knocked down, and Abdullah the Butcher accidentally hit an elbow, which must have felt like a goddamn couch, falling out of a moving van about 70 miles an hour, smashing into somebody's car. And then Hugo Savinovich, of all people, decides to help Abdullah the Butcher, and he wins. Okay. Hugo Savinovich, by the way, was the Spanish commentator, whatever you want to say, for WWE for a number of years, that is. Angelo Mosca was interviewed backstage, his arms bandaged, but he says he is going to get revenge, and he's going to be the referee for the NWA Tag Team Championship match. All while Scott McGee is bleeding out to his side, and I don't know, this made me laugh for 5 minutes. I don't know why it was so funny, but it just was. So we go to Bob Orton Jr. and the domestic violence aficionado himself, Dick Slater. Fuck Dick Slater, I'm glad he's dead. Check out the Luna Vachon documentary, or the Dark Side of the Ring, rather, and you will know why Dick Slater was known for being abusive anyway, but that just put more icing on the cake. First with Wahoo Mcdaniel and Mark Youngblood. Well, the mat was still bloody, by the way, because they didn't bother, changing any of that, cleaning any of that stuff. I mean, I know it's the territories and everything, but holy fucking shit, that was a lot of blood splatter all over the goddamn place. Things picked up a bit. There was some good tag work. I will say Orton and Slater were a good team. Mark does eventually miss a drop kick, even after Wahoo got some shots in and tagged Mark back in. And then we get the superplex off the second rope, or Orton off the second rope. 1, 2, 3. And that's about it right there. And then they target Wahoo's arm afterwards because is a friend of Ric Flair's, and they were like, okay, we're going to take out Ric Flair's friends, and that'll make it easier for Harley Race to win in the steel cage, which is supposed to be the ultimate blow-off, where nobody can interfere. Shivani interviews Rick. Again, I understand they're trying to make a big deal out of this, but good fucking grief, there is such a thing as getting to the point where you're beating the fans over the head with it. Dusty was interviewed with bad audio, so they do that interview backstage later. Charlie Brown, a.k.a. the Boogie Woogie Man, Jimmy Valiant, against the Great Kabuki. Is it you, Kabuki? Are you a warrior or an errand boy? With Gary Hart. It's a NWA TV Championship versus mask match, where the the Great Kabuki's title is up for grabs, and it has to be within the 15-minute time limit. Otherwise, you can still beat him, but it won't be for the title. That's a nice little wrinkle. This was Rest and Nerve Hold Central, the musical. Seriously, there was a lot of rest holds and nerve holds, and I understand Valiant at this point was on a decline and got by on doing the antics and doing what he could to, basically entertain the audience. And Kabuki was never the best. He was definitely cool, but never the best. And then Jimmy Valiant eventually, and I'm just going to call him Jimmy Valiant, hits an elbow, 1, 2, 3 to a pop, and apparently he was within the 15-minute time limit because he has the NWA TV Championship afterwards. Orton and Slater are talking backstage with Harley Race, and they all cut promos, and Race says he's not going to lose. Then Barbara Cleary is backstage with Dusty for the interview that they couldn't do before because of the bad audio. Dusty wants the winner. That's pretty much it. Greg Valentine against Roddy Piper, the Doge Collar match. Much blood, much chain, such wow. Dog collar match in all seriousness. This was pretty goddamn brutal. This is something that still holds up even though, in hindsight, you're like thinking it's not really much of a wrestling match, but it's not supposed to be. They'd had this blood feud. Piper had his ears busted, and Valentine was just punching on, and targeting that, but Valentine was also bleeding and everything. He's not a great representation of Seattle, Washington. If you know, you know. Greg, by the way, always was a smiling, happy-go-lucky guy. He smiled about as much as I do when I'm at work. So, clubbing blows and, just chain wrapping and stuff like that, chain whipping, beating each other outside the ring, inside the ring, and then, oh, what a night, because Greg Valentine gets pinned 1, 2, 3. He's the U.S. champion. And Gordon Sully thought he won the title, but no, it was non-title. It was just a Doge Collar match. And then Greg attacks and chokes Piper afterwards. The referee gets clubbed down. The crowd's booing. And I believe they had a series of matches at live events afterwards. More dog collar matches. That's unsafe. I don't understand why they would do that. No wonder Piper decided to go to WWE. Probably for more money, and what the hell else could he do in the Crockett's? Even though he'd done some great stuff there in Georgia and other territories. He was a made man well before he got to WWE. So, more Flair talk about the main event. And Wahoo's selling his arm. It says that that Flair will win. He knows he will. He'll bring the title back to Charlotte. So then Don Kernodle's interviewed about the main event and says that he is going to win. The late, great Don Kernodle, former NWA Tag Team Champion along with Sergeant Slaughter. So Jack and Jerry Briscoe took on Ricky Steamboat and Jay Youngblood. Scary to think how Jay Youngblood wouldn't even make it 2 years after this event. Just numerous health issues hit him, and he also had other personal issues, but just still, I think he was 30. That's really, really sad. So, this was a classic with two great tag teams. There's not really much I can add to this. The Briscoes were great hated heels, great technical wrestlers. Steamboat was a fantastic high flyer. Jay was very good. Him and Steamboat were a natural team. And they did some really, really, really good stuff. And eventually, after, it seemed like the Briscoes might retain the championships, alas, press slam into a splash. 1, 2, 3. Steamboat and Youngblood win. Then the Briscoes attack afterwards, and they attack Angelo Mosco afterwards, because he was the special guest referee for this. And new champs, and the crowd loved it. I love it. And then we go into a lull where literally about 18 million interviews happen. Like, they show credits before the main event, which I'll never understand. And then, the Boogie Woogie Man, Jimmy Valiant, as Charlie Brown's interviewed. Oh, this is for the Boogie Woogie Man. Piper's interviewed. It's like the U.S. title is mine. You still got one more year left. And then Steamboat and Youngblood want competition. And then Cottle and Sully kill all the time in the goddamn universe. Dusty interview. He has all the ladies, all the single ladies, and probably all the married ladies at that point. So, Flair entrance, it has Disco Fever. It's vaguely Strauss. Actually, it is because it's 2001 A Space Flair Odyssey. I think that's how it's said. It's Odyssey. I know. But actually, that's one of my favorite movies, so I probably should review that at some point. So, Harley comes out to a chorus of boos. And Gene Kiniski comes out as a referee. So, Flair versus Harley race. NWA Steel Cage Championship match. Steel Cage Championship match. Could have worded that a whole lot better. It was bloody. They had some really, really, good action here because Harley, even though this was pretty much his peak, he would still obviously wrestle. He would even win the NWA Championship back from Flair in March or April of '84. I forget the exact timeline, but he'd only win it for a couple weeks, or maybe a week, and he wouldn't be recognized. So that's why they will say, 7-time in quotations, because he actually is an 8-time World Heavyweight Champion. Then in subsequent years, they've said 8 times. Because the NWA governing body hasn't really meant anything in a long, long time. But Gene Kiniski nearly fucking ruining it. There's nothing wrong with trying to uphold rules. They're in a steel cage. And I know Gene Kiniski, passed away and he had massive health issues. And he's a great former NWA champion of nearly 3 years, or about 3 years. And a great technician. And, a legend in wrestling. And there's no... This did not work. This aspect didn't. Flair and Race had to fight against the fact that he wasn't doing a very good job as a referee. So, crossbody, Kiniski gets his leg rolled on, but it's like, oh, no, and then 1, 2, 3. And then Flair celebrates with the first of his many wives and a bunch of wrestlers. And then, we do a whole bunch of celebrations in the ring. Flair's very emotional in a promo afterwards. And then there's a champagne bath on an open wound. Ouch. And then Harley says he's not done. He will hound Rick. And again, did win the NWA Championship back about 3-4 months later. Or no, 4 or 5 months later. I'm trying to remember if it was March or April. But, I might be mixing that up with something else. That being said, there was a lot of good on this. But this is one of those shows that is almost better to watch with rose-tinted glasses. Because otherwise you might be like, oh, some of this hasn't aged well. That being said, though, still a landmark event. Big deal for Jim Crockett Promotions. They launched Ric Flair, who was already a name at that point, but was climbing back up. And he was a babyface by this point. Would turn heel soon afterwards. Feud with Dusty Rhodes over the next 2 Starrcades. And then against Nikita Koloff. And then Ron Garvin. And then Lex Luger. And then by '89, they would pretty much marginalize the whole goddamn thing because Jim Herd was an idiot. Anyway, agree, disagree with what I said. Like, share, subscribe. Twitter handle in the description. I'm John Redland. I'll see you soon.